This is my very first one, so be gentle, okay? Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am wrapping up all of the books that I read across the month of June. I aimed to read 7 books across the month, all with the colours of the rainbow on the cover. And I did read 7, but I don't think I got the rainbow ticked off. I did try my best. I did as good as I could, but I think I just missed out on a couple of colours. I started out the month with Red, and I read The Couple by Helly Acton, which I really enjoyed, much more than I think I was expecting to enjoy this. I gave this book 4 stars because it really genuinely did blow me away. It was the second book of Helly Acton's that I've read, and genuinely, I think her writing went from strength to strength here. This book is set in a world where people being in a couple is not seen as the norm. It's not seen as something that is kind of wanted. It's not seen as something that is admirable. And people being single is much more socially acceptable. It is much more the norm. You get a reduction on your council tax for being single, for example, or you get a reduction on your health benefits if you are a single person. Couples have to pay a lot more money if they rent an apartment, for example, or their health insurance premium goes way up. I thought that this was such an interesting concept. Our whole world is revolved around people being in relationships. Our whole world is revolved around the money that you save by being in a couple. A mortgage is much more affordable if you are doing it with another person. A lot of holidays that you will book on are based on a 2-person sharing situation rather than a person going by themselves. So seeing that flipped on its head, seeing the people being in a relationship as the kind of looked down upon, was such an interesting take. Millie, our main character, is not in a relationship, and she's working for a company called Slide, which is basically a dating app for people who just want to hook up. It's basically like Tinder, except that there is absolutely zero expectations from it. You just go, you meet the person, you hook up, you go home. That's it. The company that she is working for is developing a pill called oxytocin, which is intended to cut off the production of oxytocin, the hormone that our brain creates when we are in love. Ben, who is another marketing manager, is brought in to work with Millie to design the campaign, and they go around the country to interview people whose situations might mean that they may need to take this pill. Some of those stories are genuinely so heartbreaking. There was a woman who had been in a marriage for about 30-40 years before her husband left her for another woman, for example. And there was a father who wanted to give his child oxytocin. I think his son was about 15-16 and was starting to discover girls and was starting to discover all of that thing. And he really wanted his son to be careful. He didn't want his son to get his heart broken. So he wanted to give his son a kind of a no strings attached look on love life. Some of those stories, as I said, were really heartbreaking. And some of them were a little bit kind of making you think, sitting back and thinking, is a relationship really the worst thing in the world for these people to go through? I genuinely had to sit back and think about so many of the situations and of the stories. And I really didn't expect it to hit me as much as it did. This book is a workplace romance, which is something that I absolutely love. I am a big sucker for a workplace romance, and this one was done really, really well. There was a lot of tension built up between Ben and Millie. There was a lot of kind of harmless flirting between them in like email chains or texting, and I loved reading that. There is also, thankfully, a 1-bed situation, but because this is quite a closed door book, there wasn't a whole lot described. You were kind of left to make your own thoughts on it. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It felt a little bit kind of dystopian in that it was a little bit world turned on its head. Everything is not as we would expect it to be in our world, but I had such a great time with this book. This is Helly's second book. Her first book, The Shelf, equally blew me away with its really interesting concept, and I'm so excited to see what she's going to do next. Then I finally read Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson, and I was so blown away by this book. I actually listened to the audiobook on the recommendation of a couple of friends of mine. They said that Nicola Coughlan really added to the experience of reading this book, and holy hell, yes she did. Nicola Coughlan's narration really did bring all of the characters to life. She gave everyone such excitement. She gave them really great accents. She really put a lot of thought and a lot of excitement into every character that she was reading, and I genuinely loved that. I have a feeling that she is also doing the audiobook for The Shadow Cabinet, which is the second book of this series. I'm definitely going to look out for it, but I think if I reread this book, I would definitely reread it as a physical copy. It might just be a me thing, it might just be a book thing, but I felt like there were some times that when I was listening to the audiobook, I lost what was happening a little bit. I felt like there were a lot of characters that I needed to keep up with. There were a lot of stories that were intertwining with each other, but I was losing where I was a little bit. Maybe it's because I was listening to the audiobook while I was at work or while I was cleaning or while I was out for a walk. I wasn't giving it all of my attention all of the time, but there were little times where I was like, I'm not quite sure what's happening here. I'm not quite sure who this person is. I don't know why I'm doing this thing here. This book is following 4 friends who have known each other since they were about 10 or 11 years old, and now they are part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is a secret society of witches that live among the UK population. I loved the history of the Royal Coven. I really wasn't expecting that Anne Boleyn, one of Henry VIII's wives, would have had a hand in the creation of the Royal Coven. And I think that little moment, especially because I was going through a really big Six the Musical phase when I was listening to this book, I think that little thing just brought it up for me a little bit more. The Coven meets a young witch named Theo, who is a trans witch, and one of their members, Helena, is completely and utterly against Theo's inclusion in the Royal Coven. And throughout the rest of the book, you see Helena's transphobia really start to emerge, and it really does come to a crescendo right at the end of the book. I'm so interested to see where the Coven is going to go now that everyone has kind of dispersed into the world. There are new members coming in. There are members who are not around anymore. I'm so interested to see what's going to happen with this. As a character, I hated Helena. I didn't enjoy reading her chapters at all. I didn't enjoy reading about her, but I feel like that is a hallmark of how good Una Dawson is as a writer. I feel like she writes people like this with such vitriol, with such hatred in their hearts. I feel like she writes them so well. She writes them in a really realistic manner that you are engrossed in their story even if you don't enjoy reading about them. Something else that I really enjoyed about this book is the sheer volume of pop culture references, especially to the Spice Girls. When the Spice Girls were in the height of their fame and success, I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, so I was probably their exact target audience, and I ate everything up they did whole. So when there were so many references to the Spice Girls in this book, I knew that I was at home, basically. I knew that I had found a really great book here, but I will also say that some pop culture references can age a book a little bit, and I do feel like that might be something that this book will fall victim to, maybe a couple of years down the line. I'm not sure if it's something that is also going to appear in the second book, but let's see how it's dealt with. As I said, there is a second book in the series, The Shadow Cabinet. I think it has already come out. I'm pretty sure I've seen it on shelves around my local bookshop, so I'm definitely going to take a look out for it, and maybe I will go back to the audiobook with Nicola Coughlan again. I loved this book, surprisingly, because fantasy isn't really a thing for me. I think it's because it was kind of low fantasy, urban fantasy, kind of dotted around our actual real life world. I gave this book a very surprising 4 stars. Then, in very quick succession, I read all 3 books in the Bright Falls trilogy, starting with a reread of Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I gave this 4.5 stars the first time, and I think I upped it to 5 stars this time because on reread, it read so much better. As you can imagine, this book is about Delilah Green, who has left Bright Falls, a very small town in Oregon. She has left it for the bright lights of New York and is trying to make it as a photographer when she's called back to Bright Falls for her stepsister Astrid's wedding. She and Astrid have not really been in touch for the last 10 or 15 years, but Delilah really needs the money, so she heads back, all of her equipment in tow, and just basically sucks it up for 2 weeks. While she's there, she meets with Astrid's best friend Claire, who Delilah had always had a thing for back when they were in school. And now that she has seen Claire as an adult, she's seeing her again, right, bringing back all of those feelings that she had. I really enjoyed this book on reread. As I said, I think it read better the second time because I had all of the nuances of what the characters were like from having read this and Astrid's book from the second time. But there were a couple of things that I didn't enjoy from the first read that still kind of niggled me the second time. I didn't really love how much Claire babies her young daughter, Ruby. And when I say young, I think Ruby was like 11 by this book. So I felt like she was kind of treating her a little bit younger than what she was written as. And I think that might be a single mother thing. Her father was not very dependable, wasn't really in Claire and Ruby's life as much as Claire probably would have wanted him to be. I really like that towards the end of the book, though, she did start to mellow out. She did start to kind of realise that maybe she was a little bit helicopter parenty. This book is full of steamy scenes. They are really well written. They're really well dispersed throughout the book. And I really enjoyed all of them. There are so many great scenes here between Claire and Delilah. There is a one bed scene, which we all know that is one of my favourite tropes. And I genuinely loved watching the connection between Delilah and Claire really genuinely grow I also really loved watching the relationship between Delilah and Astrid kind of soften, kind of thaw out the ice that they had brought up between the two of them. And I really loved watching them kind of recognize each other as a person and come to terms with how the other person was as a personality. I really, really loved this book. I think it's my favorite book of the series still, but it's such a great start out to the series. Then I went straight on to the second book, Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, and again, I really enjoyed this one more on the reread. I think I understood Astrid a little bit more, having just read Delilah, having already read this book. I understood her character a little bit more. I understood how her mind worked, how she processes things, and basically the influence that her mother had had on her life. I think I understood it a little bit more. This book follows Astrid, who is Delilah from the first book's stepsister, and following the breakdown of her relationship in the first book, Astrid is trying to discover who she is. She's really thrown herself into work. She is an interior designer, and she is hired by the people who are running Inside America, which is a kind of an extreme makeover home edition, but for B&Bs, for inns, for that kind of hotel situation in the US. She's hired as the lead designer, and she is going to be working with Jordan, who is the granddaughter of the inn owner. Astrid and Jordan didn't really have a great meeting for the first time. Jordan kind of spilled coffee all over Astrid's favourite dress, and when they meet, there is a lot of frostiness between the two of them. However, over the course of the book, this frostiness does tend to thaw, not just professionally, but also in their personal lives. I really loved this discovering your sexuality later in life book. This happened to me, it happened to a lot of people that I know, and I really enjoyed how well this was portrayed. I really enjoyed the kind of sitting with yourself and wondering who you are as a person, what kind of things that you are into, who you are into, what kind of a label do you want to put on yourself? Do you want to put a label on yourself at all? I really loved watching Astrid also realize how big the influence her mother had in her life was, come to terms with it, and decide that that wasn't the life that she wanted to live anymore. I really loved her standing up to her mother towards the end of this book. It's such a great scene. It was really well written, and I really, really respected Astrid as a character for seeing her do that. I understand how much pressure it can put on you. I understand how difficult it can be to talk to people about things that aren't really going well for you. I really respected her for it. Like the first book, this one does have some really great steam in it as well. I think actually I prefer the steam in this one to Delilah Green Doesn't Care, but I think overall Delilah is still my favourite book. However, I did give this one a higher rating on a reread as well. I gave it a 4 stars the first time that I read it, and the second time I gave it 4.5. Then, to finish out the series, I read an arc of Iris Kelly Doesn't Date. I really enjoyed this one. I think, again, it's going to be one that I'm going to have to reread. I might enjoy it a little bit more on the reread. Let's see. It was the truth for the first 2 books of the series. Might be the truth for this one too. This one is following Iris, who is the third friend in the little group that they have in Bright Falls. She hasn't really been so lucky in love lately. A guy that she had been seeing, they broke it off because he wanted kids and she didn't. A girl that she was seeing ended up being married, so they broke that one off. And Iris feels that she's had no luck in love lately. She's just going to go casually about it. So she goes out to a bar one night and brings somebody home, and they turn out to have one of the worst one-night stands in history. They don't even get to bed because Stefania ends up throwing up on Iris in a fit of anxiety. A couple of days later, Iris, who is a romance author and is kind of going through some writer's block at the moment, decides to get her creative juices flowing again by signing up for a community theatre, who is doing a production of Much Ado About Nothing. When she gets there, everyone seems to be really excited to see her, because Stefania turns out to be Stevie, who had told all of the people in the production company that she and Iris really hit it off. They're in a relationship, they're giving everything a go. And now it seems like Iris has just come to see her girlfriend to spend time together rather than to audition for the show. Iris does audition for the show, and Stevie and Iris end up playing the 2 main characters, Beatrice and Benedict, opposite each other. And I really loved watching them rehearse together. I loved watching them prepare for the show, the whole guidings of the cast, the crew, everything. It was so interesting to see. As somebody who is a bit of a theatre nerd, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also ended up really identifying with Stevie. I didn't think that I would, because actually, when I first met Stevie, I didn't really enjoy reading her. But as we got further into the book, I realised that Stevie and I had quite a lot in common. We both have quite a few issues with anxiety. We both have quite a few moments where anxiety can kind of take over our lives. And I felt like that was something that I found a kindred spirit in. As with the other books, this one has some really great steamy scenes in it. There are some really fantastic bed scenes in here that I genuinely really enjoyed. I think that's definitely something that I'm going to have to reread this book for and see which of the books that I had read had the best steam in them. One thing I did not enjoy about this book though was the miscommunication between Iris and Stevie. I wish they had just sat down and told each other, this is what's happening in my life, this is where my life is going right now, this is how I feel about you, how do we make that work together? I feel like that is just what was missing. They needed to just sit down and be adults for 20 minutes and get all of their feelings and their thoughts out on the table. It's something that I feel like this book was missing. I really hate the miscommunication trope anyway, so I feel like if that had been dealt with, I probably would have enjoyed this a little bit more. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think I gave it a 4 stars, maybe a 4.5. It was a little bit weaker than the other 2 books in the series, I think. I didn't enjoy it as much as the other 2, but like with the others, let's see if I go back and reread it and it brings it up a little bit more again. Then I listened to the audiobook of Wild Things by Laura Kay. I had previously read her debut, The Split, and I really loved it. So when I saw this book come up on NetGalley, I immediately went for it. This book is about Elle, who wants to kind of spice her life up a little bit, so she has created a list of wild things that she wants to do every month for the year. She wants to go out of her comfort zone, do things she's never done before, but it hasn't really been going so well. She has had a threesome where she basically was sat on a chair watching. She got a tattoo that she didn't really love. And when it comes to April, she's running out of ideas. But one of her friends, Jamie, his girlfriend has left him just as he has started signing off for their house. Together with 2 other friends of theirs, Will and Ray, they decide to pool together and buy the house themselves. This book was a really big city people living the country bumpkin lifestyle. As somebody who did the opposite thing of growing up in the country and then moved to the city, I thought it was a really interesting kind of a reversal of what my life had been like. But it was really funny watching them kind of struggle with coming to terms with country life, that there isn't always going to be a bus outside your door every 5 minutes, that the nearest shop might not be a 2-minute walk down the street, it might be a 20-minute drive away. One of the housemates gets a group of chickens, which I feel really brought onto the community. I really feel like that made everything a little bit more exciting. He set up an Instagram account for the renovations they were doing on the house and for the chickens that had like 80,000 followers by the time the book was over. I would read about Jamie, his Instagram account, and the chickens for the rest of my life until the cows come home. I really loved that aspect of it. Elle has had a crush on Ray, one of the other people that has moved into the house, since she met her. And I don't think I liked this pairing. I don't think that Ray was the person for Elle. And I don't feel like we saw a lot of build-up of what Ray felt about Elle. I feel like when they did eventually get together, it felt a little bit rushed for me because there was no build-up. There was no talking about how Ray felt about Elle. It was a one-person perspective, and I think I would have loved to see a bit more of a multi-perspective book. I would have loved to see a chapter from Will's point of view, or a chapter from Jamie's point of view, or a chapter from Ray's point of view. But I feel like only spending time in Elle's head with Elle's thoughts and Elle's feelings on the situation, it closed us off a little bit to that other aspects of the house that I really would have loved to see. But I really loved that in this book, platonic relationships were given just as much love and just as much time as romantic relationships. Elle has a little bit of a tumultuous relationship with her parents. They are on a cruise for the majority of this book, but she has a really great relationship with her brother, and they seem to get along really well, to the point that Elle, when she's going through some trouble, actually goes and stays with him for a couple of days. She and Jamie and Will all get along together really well. You can tell that they are looking out for each other. They're not just friends, they're not roommates, they're also co-workers. They all work together in the same office, and I really loved watching them have a kind of a covert meeting, which ended up then going to Pret a Manger, getting coffee and just sitting and chatting gossip for about an hour. Something I would have loved to see though is a little bit more of Elle's wild things list. It felt like for the majority of the book that was just rushed away to the side until we got to the epilogue, and it turns out that things that had happened just slotted into the list anyway. But I would have loved to see a kind of a more conscious effort done to include the list throughout the book, things that Elle was doing to actively put things onto the list. I feel like if it was important enough to be on the title billing, it probably should have had a little bit more of an impact in the book. Overall, though, I did really enjoy this book. I gave it a pretty solid 4 stars, and I am definitely going to check out some more of Laura Kay's books. Then I ended out the month with Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. I wanted to reread this in the lead up to August when the series is going to come out. And this was such a little comfort in a book. This is so quick. I think I sped through this within like an hour and a half sitting on my couch last night. And I genuinely loved this. This one follows Nick and Charlie on their trip to Paris with their school and with Elle, Tara and Darcy's school as well. So you see the friendship group all really get together in Paris and they have a lot of days out among themselves. They go to the Louvre, they go to the Eiffel Tower, they go to the Arc de Triomphe. I really loved seeing that. It kind of brought back memories of my own school tour in Barcelona with all of my friends going around the Nou Camp, going around like this really big shopping centre and aquarium somewhere in Barcelona city. I loved this book. Like I said, it's such a comfort, but it does come with a couple of trigger warnings. There are some discussions of homophobia. There are some discussions of an eating disorder. There are some discussions of transphobia in here. I loved this book. I know that it can be quite a difficult read for some people, but I felt like this was so comforting. It also brought not just Nick and Charlie's relationship forward in this book, but also Tao and Elle, which I had been waiting for since book 1. And as soon as it happened, the first time I started squealing like a little girl, and I think this is the second time this happened here, I just went, oh. It's genuinely so heartwarming to see these people come to terms with their sexuality, come to terms with who they are as people, and to just accept who they are as people, and also acceptance among their friendship group as well. I cannot wait for the 5th installment of this to come out. I cannot wait for the 2nd series of the Netflix show to come out. If you need a little bit of a pick-me-up at any time over the year, always go and reach out for the Heartstopper of Comics. Those are all of the books that I read in June. Like I said, I tried to do a rainbow, but I don't think we got there in the end. What was the best book that you read in June, or what is the first book that's going to kick off your July? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a rainbow emoji, even though we didn't technically get there. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.